The old man clutched his worn-out duffel bag like it held a piece of his soul. Security scanned it and then burst out laughing. What they didn't know was that in just 7 minutes, everyone in that terminal would stop talking, moving, even breathing. The sun had just begun to rise over the city skyline, painting the airport's glass facade in shades of amber and rose gold. Inside Terminal C, the hum of rolling suitcases and early morning yawns filled the air. Gate announcements echoed overhead, half heard and mostly ignored by people rushing to their flights. But amid all that movement and noise, one man stood very still, his presence quiet, almost invisible. He was in his early 80s, dressed plainly in a faded army windbreaker with the embroidered remnants of a unit patch barely visible on the left breast. His khaki slacks were pressed, his boots polished to a muted shine. But the most striking thing about him wasn't his appearance. It was the bag he held. It was an old army green duffel worn at the seams and stained with stories no civilian could read. The canvas was frayed, the zipper rusty, and one of the side pockets had been sewn shut with black dental floss. The man's gnarled fingers gripped the handle like it was something sacred, not just luggage, but legacy. As he stepped into the security line, a young father behind him instinctively pulled his daughter closer, trying to move past the slow guy. But the old man didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to care. When it was finally his turn at the TSA checkpoint, he placed the duffel on the conveyor belt gently, like placing a sleeping infant into a crib. He removed his boots, revealing mismatched socks. One was plain white. The other bore the logo of the 2nd Infantry Division. He stood patiently, quietly, eyes following the duffel as it inched toward the scanner. The TSA agent watching the X-ray monitor was barely out of his 20s, bored, gum-popping, and eager to make small talk with his colleague at the next lane. "Yo, check this out," the agent snorted, pointing at the screen. "Looks like Grandpa brought a time capsule. What is this? World War II starter pack?" His buddy leaned in and laughed. "Bet there's a musket in there or something, or a telegram from Lincoln." The old man heard them. Of course he did, but he said nothing. He just watched. The agent opened the duffel with a careless zip, flipping back the canvas flap with a smirk that vanished the moment he looked inside. There was no laptop, no liquids, no wires, just a few items. A pair of heavily scuffed combat boots, soles nearly worn through. A tin shaving kit with initials etched in blocky letters. WHH. A stack of folded letters, yellowed with time, tied together with a bootlace. A photograph encased in a plastic sleeve. 8 young men in uniform, arms around each other, grinning through dirt and sweat. And at the bottom, wrapped in a field dressing, a small, dull silver medal, its ribbon faded, its weight undeniable. The agent held it up, squinting. "What's this? A toy?" The older man answered in a calm, steady voice. "That's a Silver Star. Earned it in '68. The younger agent looked up. "Vietnam." The vet nodded. "QUNGTR. Province. 3rd Squad. 2 of them in that photo never came home." The agent looked again at the medal, then at the picture, then down at the boots. There was a pause. For a split second, you could almost see something shift behind his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. But it passed. With a chuckle, he handed the medal to his colleague. "Guess Grandpa brought his whole war with him." The second agent laughed. "Hope he left the PTSD at home." They laughed louder this time. A few passengers in nearby lines turned to look. One woman rolled her eyes. Another man muttered something under his breath and checked his boarding pass, clearly uninterested in a scene. But the vet, he still didn't say a word. He just took a step closer to the conveyor belt, hands clasped in front of him, posture straight as a ruler. Decades of training had taught him when silence was more powerful than speech. A young boy about 7 or 8 years old stood a few feet away with his father, both watching quietly. The boy tugged on his dad's sleeve and whispered, "Is he a real soldier?" His father bent down. "I think he was. A long time ago." The boy kept staring, eyes fixed on the bag, the medal, and the old man's unmoving face. By now, the agent had begun tossing the items back into the duffel without care, dropping the medal on top of the boots, crumpling the photograph slightly as he shoved it back in. "Okay, you're good to go, sir," he said, voice flat and patronizing. The veteran reached forward, lifted the bag, and brushed the photo gently back into place. For a moment, he paused, his hand resting on the old picture. His thumb gently ran across the face of one of the soldiers. Then he zipped the bag closed, slowly, carefully. He didn't thank them. He didn't glare or protest. He simply put on his boots, slung the duffel over his shoulder, and walked past the checkpoint with the same quiet dignity he'd carried since the day he came home. The agents turned back to their monitors, already forgetting him, but the little boy didn't. He kept watching, kept thinking, and in just 7 minutes, every single person in that terminal would be reminded exactly what that man and that bag had carried. The veteran made his way down the long corridor past the TSA checkpoint, his boots tapping softly against the polished tile floor. He moved slowly, not from weakness, but from deliberation, as if every step was weighed, measured, and earned. A digital clock above the gate flashed 7:53 a.m., 7 minutes to a moment no one would forget. Behind him, the two TSA agents still chuckled, their laughter echoing faintly off the terminal walls. "Did you see his socks?" one said. "Guy looked like he got dressed in the dark. One Army, one Grandpa Special." "Dude probably thinks that bag is going to get him bumped to first class," the other replied with a smirk. "Should have put it in a museum, not on a plane." Their laughter caught the attention of a few travelers nearby. A middle-aged woman in business attire glanced over, curious. A college student looked up from his phone, but like most people in public, they chose silence. A shrug, a quiet headshake. No one wanted to get involved. The old man had settled on a row of seats near Gate 42. He placed his bag on his lap and gently unzipped it again, not to show anyone, but to make sure everything was still in place. His fingers lingered over the photo, smoothing the creased edge the agent had bent. Then he adjusted the metal, ensuring the ribbon wasn't twisted. A janitor pushing a mop passed by and nodded respectfully. "Morning, sir." The vet looked up and smiled. "Morning, son." The mop man slowed. "Silver Star, huh?" The vet nodded again. "Long time ago. Different world." "I'll say," the janitor replied, shaking his head. "These days, they don't make 'em like you no more." He walked on. That was the only kindness the vet had received all morning. Back at the security checkpoint, a supervisor, mid-40s, authoritative but distracted, approached the two agents. "I got a report. Someone was laughing at a passenger's belongings." "Vet, apparently. You guys know anything about that?" Both agents straightened. "Nah, nothing happened. He was just carrying old junk, boots and some metal thing. Looked like a war hoarder." "Yeah," the second added quickly. "He didn't say anything, didn't look upset. We were just making conversation." The supervisor narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He didn't have time to babysit attitudes. He had other problems to deal with. He walked off, and the agents went back to scanning carry-ons and cracking jokes. But the mood in the terminal was shifting. Word had started to travel, quietly, in murmurs and side glances. An elderly couple nearby leaned in toward each other after overhearing the TSA's laughter. "Did you see his bag?" the woman asked softly. "That's not junk. That's history." "I was in the Navy in '79, her husband replied. "That kind of metal, you don't laugh at that. You salute it." Meanwhile, a gate agent walked past the veteran on her way to a counter. She glanced down at his bag, paused mid-step, and slowly turned around. "Sir?" she asked kindly. He looked up, startled. "Yes, ma'am. I saw your medal. Would you like me to bring you some water, or maybe a coffee?" He smiled faintly. "No, but thank you. That's very kind." She smiled back and walked away. No one else had spoken to him in half an hour. Suddenly, a child's voice broke the quiet hum of travel chatter. "Daddy," the boy from the security line whispered. Why were those men laughing at him? His father hesitated. "Because sometimes people forget what respect means." The boy frowned. "But he was nice and brave, right?" "Yes," the father said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Very brave." At that moment, a voice boomed through the airport's speakers. "Attention, this is a gate-wide announcement. Please pause all boarding procedures. Terminal staff, prepare for special escort arrival." Heads turned. "What's that about?" someone asked aloud. The gate agent returned to her station, suddenly looking more focused. She picked up a phone, murmured something into it, then stood up straighter. A slow hush began to ripple through the area like a wave gently folding in on itself. The old man hadn't moved, but he looked toward the window, where flashing lights were now approaching from the tarmac. 3 black SUVs and a transport van pulling up near a side entrance most travelers never noticed. A uniformed officer stepped out of the first vehicle. A second followed, then a third. All wore full ceremonial dress, shined metals, crisp collars, white gloves. In perfect coordination, they began unfolding a U.S. flag with reverent precision. The terminal grew quieter. The janitor stopped mopping. The gate agent put down her radio. Even the TSA agents, who had been mid-joke, stood frozen, their grins slowly fading as they turned toward the glass wall and saw the flag begin to rise. An airline manager appeared near the veteran's seat. "Sir," he said with gentle formality, "are you ready?" The old man stood up slowly. He reached into the duffel, pulled out the boots, the photo, and the medal, and placed them in a neat formation inside the open bag. Then he zipped it closed and slung it over his shoulder once more. His eyes met the manager's. "I'm ready." They began walking toward the private service entrance, the escort now in formation outside. As the doors opened, the vet stepped through them into the rising dawn and the arms of ceremony. Back inside the terminal, no one spoke. The boy stood silently next to his father. The janitor held his mop like a flagpole. Even the TSA agent stared blankly, unsure of what to do, what to say, because in that moment, the laughter had stopped, the rush had paused, and the airport had gone completely, utterly silent. The automatic doors whispered shut behind the old man as he stepped onto the tarmac. The rising sun caught the silver on his medal, reflecting off the tinted windows of the 3 black SUVs that had pulled up like a presidential motorcade. No one quite knew why he was being escorted this way. Not yet, but everyone inside the terminal could feel it. Something was shifting. Inside, silence still hung thick in the air, as if the building itself were holding its breath. The janitor quietly leaned his mop against a wall and stood at attention. The young boy had taken a seat now, still peering toward the glass with wide eyes, hugging his stuffed animal. "Dad," he whispered, "why is he going out there like that?" His father, eyes glossy, jaw clenched, put an arm around his son. "Because someone finally remembered who he is." At the TSA checkpoint, the 2 agents who'd mocked the vet tried to return to business as usual. One scanned a laptop bag, the other waved through a family of 5, but the rhythm was gone. So was the confidence. They could feel it. The looks. The judgment. The uncomfortable silence that wasn't just silence anymore. It was a mirror. Passengers weren't ignoring them anymore. They were watching. They were remembering. Suddenly, a stern voice echoed through their earpieces. "Supervisors to Checkpoint C, now." The agents exchanged glances. A minute later, their supervisor arrived, flanked by a man in a dark suit with a Department of Homeland Security badge and another in full military dress blues. The second man's chest shimmered with medals, and his presence was magnetic, sharp-eyed, square-shouldered, and utterly unamused. The supervisor didn't waste time. "You two, step aside." "But sir—" "Now." The agents obeyed. The man in dress blues stepped forward, scanning their faces with a gaze that seemed to slice right through any pretense. "I just spoke to Colonel Hastings," he said, voice low and commanding. "The gentleman you humiliated at this checkpoint. He's not just a Silver Star recipient. He's a retired command sergeant major with 42 years of active service. Served in Vietnam, Panama, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Lost more brothers than you'll ever have friends." The younger agent blinked. "We didn't know." "That's the point," the officer interrupted coldly. "You didn't ask. You didn't wonder. You looked at a man who carried history in his hands, and all you saw was a joke." The second agent opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. The DHS official stepped in. "As of this moment, both of you are being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into conduct and violation of the TSA's Code of Professionalism." "But it was just a bag," one blurted out. "No," the officer replied. "It was a man's life." Back in the terminal, the gate agent picked up the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Flight 227 to Dallas will begin boarding shortly. Please be advised, one seat has been reassigned by executive request." People exchanged confused looks. A reassigned seat? Outside on the tarmac, a flight attendant descended the boarding stairs and approached the elderly veteran. She offered a respectful salute, which he returned slowly. "Sir," she said, "we've prepared seat 1A for you." "I didn't book that," he replied quietly. "I know," she said with a warm smile. "But the president of the airline called, said it was the least we could do." He looked at her with a puzzled expression. "You mean the airport president?" She shook her head. No, sir. The president of the entire airline. He's waiting to speak with you after you land in Dallas. Apparently, your old commanding officer made a few calls. The old man blinked. He hadn't heard that name in years. His throat tightened, but he nodded. As he was helped up the stairs, the janitor from earlier quietly stepped outside and raised a hand in salute. The veteran paused halfway up the steps, turned, and saluted back. Inside the terminal, passengers now lined up for boarding. But something was different. People weren't looking at their phones. They weren't annoyed at the delay. They were talking about the man, the medal, the moment. "I flew in a Black Hawk once," a man in a business suit told a teenager. "But I never served. My brother did. He would have loved to meet that guy." A woman with a stroller turned to another. "I teach 4th grade. My kids need to hear stories like this, not just the heroes in textbooks, but the ones in airports." The boy who had asked about the vet earlier looked up at the gate agent and said softly, "Can I sit where he sat? Just for a second?" She nodded. He climbed into the chair, placed his hands gently where the duffel had rested, and whispered to himself, "Thank you." As the last passengers boarded, whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into phone calls. One by one, stories were shared. On Facebook, in texts, on Instagram. "Just saw a Silver Star vet get honored at my gate." TSA mocked an old soldier. Airport fell silent after. "That man changed something today. We all felt it." By the time Flight 227 was in the air, the photo of the veteran walking toward the black SUVs had already gone viral. A traveler had captured it, his silhouette backlit by sunlight, his duffel swinging at his side, 3 uniformed escorts flanking him like a returning general. The caption was simple. They laughed at his bag. And then the whole airport stood still. Back at the terminal, the TSA supervisor stood alone at the now quiet checkpoint, watching the photo spread across his feed. He shook his head slowly, then tapped his walkie-talkie. "All checkpoints, effective immediately, new protocol. Flag every decorated vet for expedited courtesy assistance. No exceptions." There was no reply, just a quiet acknowledgement across frequencies. The lesson had landed, and as the last gate closed, the janitor returned to his mop, but not before whispering to himself, "About damn time we remembered who built the runway we walk on." The engines of Flight 227 roared to life as the aircraft taxied slowly toward the runway, carrying with it more than just passengers and luggage. It carried a shift in the atmosphere, an awakening that had rippled across the airport like a thunderclap without sound. Back at Gate 42, the hush had not lifted. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. The boy who'd asked about the vet now sat quietly in his seat, his stuffed animal resting in his lap, his young mind trying to understand the magnitude of what he'd just witnessed. His father hadn't said another word. He didn't need to. His expression, somber, proud, ashamed all at once, said enough. People weren't in a hurry anymore. Phones that had once captured fleeting selfies were now being used to post, to reflect, to remember. The photo of the veteran, duffel in hand, back straight, medals glinting, had taken on a life of its own. They laughed at his bag, and then the whole airport stood still. The caption was now trending. At the food court, a young man in a hoodie quietly pulled a chair out for an older woman with a cane. She looked surprised, then smiled. Nearby, 2 teenage boys removed their ball caps and sat down without saying a word, as if finally understanding the quiet dignity that men like the one they just saw had once fought to preserve. Back at TSA Checkpoint C, the mood had transformed. Where there had been smirks and sarcasm hours earlier, there was now silence and restraint. The 2 suspended agents had been escorted out quietly, their badges turned in. Their departure hadn't sparked cheers, only a heavy, sober acknowledgement, the kind of reckoning that doesn't need applause to make its point. At the center of the terminal, near an empty corridor wall, the janitor stood holding something in his hands. It was a printout of the now viral photo, black and white, a little pixelated, but unmistakable. He looked around, saw the blank space above the water fountains, and slowly taped the photo to the wall. Beneath it, on a napkin, he'd written, "This man walked quietly among us. Let's walk with more purpose because of it." People began to stop and read. Some took pictures. One woman placed a small American flag pin on the corner of the napkin. No one had to say anything. They simply nodded and moved along. Changed. In the airport lounge upstairs, the regional operations director stood by the window, phone in hand. He was still on the line with corporate. "No, sir," he said. It wasn't planned, no ceremony, no warning, just something real. Something we forgot we needed. A pause. Yes, he's in seat 1A now, full honors arranged for arrival in Dallas. Military escort waiting. Another pause. And, sir, I think we need to talk about training. Respect training. Not just rules, but values. Because that man carried more than boots and medals. He carried every lesson we've let slip away. Back down at the gate, the woman who had offered the vet a coffee now sat at her desk, her eyes still misty. She glanced over to where he'd once sat. It felt different now, as if the chair itself carried weight. A boy walked over, maybe 12, maybe 13, and held up his phone. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Was that really a silver star?" She nodded. The boy stared at the seat. "My grandpa never talked about his war stuff. I didn't think it was a big deal." She leaned forward. "It's the biggest deal there is," she said softly. "Freedom only feels invisible because brave people carry it so well." He didn't respond. He just sat down next to the chair and looked at it, as if hoping to understand something unspoken. And still, the terminal remained hushed. Not out of fear, not out of discomfort, but out of respect. It was like time had slowed to make space for remembrance, for recognition. The usual airport chaos had given way to an eerie calm, as if people finally realized they were standing on sacred ground, paved by the quiet, aging footsteps of those like the man with the duffel. Minutes later, another flight began boarding. The gate agent picked up the mic but paused before speaking. She cleared her throat. "Before we begin boarding Flight 184, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a passenger who reminded us today of the quiet strength that built this country. If you are a veteran or currently serving, we thank you. We see you. We will do better." There was no applause, but there were tears, some discreet, some not. And in that rarest of places, in a world of rushing gates and missed connections, something happened that no flight delay or security check could ever accomplish. The airport found stillness, not because it had to, but because a quiet man with a weathered bag, mismatched socks, and a heart full of sacrifice reminded everyone what real honor looks like. And so, in the aftermath of ridicule, in the echo of shallow laughter, the airport did the only thing it could. It went silent. And in that silence, it remembered. In a world that moves too fast to notice the quiet ones, sometimes it takes a moment like this, a laugh at the wrong time, aimed at the wrong man, to remind us who truly built the road beneath our feet. That veteran wasn't asking for applause, upgrades, or attention. He was simply carrying a bag filled with memories, love, and sacrifice. His life folded into fabric and metals. But when the laughter stopped and the silence settled in, we remembered freedom isn't free. It's carried on the shoulders of those who never needed a spotlight to be heroes. Today wasn't just about one man being respected. It was about all of us learning to look again. And this time, see clearly. Honor doesn't come from uniforms. It comes from remembering who wore them. So the next time you pass someone who walks a little slower, wears an old patch, or carries a worn-out duffel, don't look away. Nod, acknowledge, and remember what silence once taught a whole airport. If this story moved you, subscribe to Soulful Storytime for more powerful true tales that honor sacrifice, restore dignity, and remind us what respect truly means. Hit that bell. You'll feel it.